Night of April 13th, 2024, something happened that military analysts said would never happen. Iran fired over 300 drones and ballistic missiles directly at Israel, not through proxy forces hidden in Lebanon or Gaza, not through secret funding of armed groups. Iran itself, openly, directly, for the first time in history. The skies over the Middle East lit up with interceptor missiles racing to destroy incoming drones before they reached Israeli cities. Jordan opened its airspace to help shoot them down. American warships in the Mediterranean fired interceptors. British fighter jets engaged Iranian drones over Iraq and Syria. The entire region held its breath. Was this the beginning of a full-scale Middle Eastern war? Was this the moment that decades of shadow conflict finally became open warfare? Most people watching the news that night had no idea how this moment came to be. They saw the explosions in the sky. They saw the emergency meetings. They saw world leaders making urgent phone calls. But they did not understand the decades of history that made that night inevitable. This documentary will give you that understanding. We are going to go back to the very beginning of this conflict, not 1979, not 1948, the very beginning. And we are going to trace every step that led two nations from cautious coexistence to the edge of full-scale war. By the time this video ends, you will understand this conflict better than most people who claim to be experts on it. Before the hatred, when Iran and Israel were allies. Here is a fact that most people find genuinely shocking. For most of the 20th century, Iran and Israel were not enemies, they were partners. To understand why that partnership existed and why it collapsed so completely, you need to understand the world that both countries were born into. Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948. Iran at that time was a monarchy ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a modernizing ruler with strong ties to the United States and Western Europe. He was building a secular, modern state in the ancient Persian heartland. Now, look at the map of the Middle East in 1948. Israel was surrounded by Arab states that had just tried to destroy it the day after it declared independence. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, all Arab nations, all united in opposition to a Jewish state in the region. Iran was not Arab, Iran was Persian, and Persian identity in the 20th century was consciously distinct from Arab identity. The Shah actively promoted Persian nationalism over Islamic or Arab solidarity. He looked toward ancient Persian civilization rather than Arab culture as his reference point. This meant that Iran had no particular reason to join the Arab coalition against Israel, and it had very strong practical reasons to maintain relationships with Israel. Both Iran and Israel faced threats from radical Arab nationalism. Both were close allies of the United States. Both had reasons to monitor and counter Soviet influence in the region. The result was what strategists called the periphery doctrine. Israel's strategy of building alliances with non-Arab states on the periphery of the Arab world. Iran was the most important of these peripheral allies. The cooperation between Israel and Iran during the Shah's era was extensive and deep. Israeli agricultural experts traveled to Iran to help develop Iranian farming techniques in arid regions. Iranian oil flowed to Israel through a secret pipeline. The Trans-Israel Pipeline, also known as the Eilat-Ashkelon Pipeline, was built specifically to transport Iranian oil from the Red Sea port of Eilat to the Mediterranean in Ashkelon. Israeli and Iranian intelligence services worked closely together. Savak, the Iranian secret service, received training and cooperation from Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. Both services shared information about common threats. Iranian military officers received training in Israel. Israeli defense companies sold equipment to the Iranian military. The two countries did not have formal diplomatic relations at the highest level. Iran was careful not to publicly acknowledge its cooperation with Israel in order to maintain its standing in the Muslim world. But behind the scenes, the relationship was substantial and mutually beneficial. Trade between the two countries reached hundreds of millions of dollars annually. There were direct flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. Iranian Jews, one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, lived in Iran with relative freedom. Israel even had a quasi-diplomatic mission in Tehran called a trade office that functioned much like an embassy. This was not a friendship between people who loved each other. It was a strategic partnership between governments that needed each other. But it worked. For 30 decades it worked. And then, in the space of 1 year, it collapsed entirely.
The revolution that changed everything. To understand what happened in 1979, you need to understand what Iran looked like in the years before the revolution. The Shah was modernizing Iran rapidly. He launched what he called the White Revolution in 1963. Land reform, women's rights, literacy programs, industrial development. Iran was changing faster than many Iranians could absorb. Western culture was flooding into Iranian cities. Western companies were operating throughout the country. Western advisors were everywhere. The capital, Tehran, was transforming into a modern metropolis with Western-style restaurants, cinemas, and nightlife. For educated urban Iranians who benefited from modernization, this was exciting. For rural Iranians, for deeply religious Iranians, for Iranians who felt their traditional culture was being destroyed, this was a crisis. And the Shah's methods of dealing with opposition made everything worse. Savak, his secret police, was feared throughout Iranian society. Political opponents were imprisoned, tortured, and disappeared. There was no free press, no political opposition, no accountability. The Shah ruled as an absolute monarch who believed he knew what was best for Iran. By the mid-1970s, opposition to the Shah was coming from every direction. Leftists and communists who wanted a socialist Iran. Nationalists who wanted an independent Iran free from American influence. And Islamic scholars who wanted a return to traditional Islamic values in governance. These groups had almost nothing in common except one thing: they all hated the Shah. The Islamic movement was led from exile by a 77-year-old scholar named Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini had been expelled from Iran in 1964 for his opposition to the Shah. He spent his exile in Iraq and later in France. From exile, he recorded his speeches and lectures on cassette tapes. Those cassette tapes were smuggled into Iran by the thousands. They were copied and distributed in mosques and homes across the country. Khomeini's voice reached millions of Iranians who had never seen him. His message was powerful and simple. The Shah was a corrupt puppet of America and Israel. The solution was Islamic governance based on the principles of the Quran. And Israel, which he called a cancer in the heart of the Islamic world, had to be opposed at every level. In 1978, mass protests began erupting across Iran. The Shah's security forces killed protesters. The killings produced more protests. The protests produced more killings. The cycle accelerated until the entire country seemed to be in revolt. On January 16, 1979, the Shah left Iran. He said he was going on vacation. He never came back. 14 days later, on February 1, 1979, Khomeini returned to Iran after 15 years in exile. He was greeted by what some estimates say was the largest crowd in human history. Millions of Iranians lined the roads from the airport to Tehran. Within 10 days of his return, the Iranian military declared neutrality. The government collapsed. The Islamic Revolution was complete. Iran was now an Islamic republic, and everything changed immediately. The Israeli trade mission in Tehran was closed and handed to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The Iranian flag that had flown over the building was replaced with a Palestinian flag. Khomeini declared the last Friday of Ramadan as International Quds Day. Quds is the Arabic name for Jerusalem. This annual event, still observed in Iran today, was designed as a global expression of opposition to Israel and support for Palestinian control of Jerusalem. Iran's new constitution explicitly committed the state to supporting oppressed Muslims everywhere in the world. In practice, this meant supporting armed resistance against Israel. The partnership that had lasted 30 years was dead, and something much more dangerous had taken its place: building the proxy network. After the revolution, Iran did not immediately have the military capability to directly confront Israel. Israel was a nuclear-capable state with one of the most advanced military forces in the world. Iran was a country in the middle of a revolution facing economic chaos and international isolation. But Khomeini and the new Islamic Republic had a strategy. If Iran could not defeat Israel directly, it would build a network of armed groups around Israel's borders that could fight on Iran's behalf. This strategy is called asymmetric warfare. Instead of challenging a stronger enemy head-on, you surround them with multiple smaller threats that drain their resources, their attention, and their sense of security. The first and most important piece of this network was Hezbollah. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to destroy PLO bases that were launching attacks on northern Israel. Iran saw this as an opportunity. Iranian Revolutionary Guard soldiers were sent to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. They began organizing, funding, and training a new armed organization from among Lebanon's Shia Muslim community. That organization became Hezbollah, the Party of God. Hezbollah was not simply a militia, it was a state within a state. Iran provided hundreds of millions of dollars annually: weapons, training, intelligence, ideology. Over the following decades, Hezbollah became the most heavily armed non-state military organization in the world. It built a vast tunnel network under southern Lebanon. It accumulated an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. It built hospitals, schools, and social services that gave it deep roots in Lebanese Shia communities. For Israel, Hezbollah became the most serious military threat on its northern border. For Iran, Hezbollah became its most powerful instrument of pressure against Israel, a forward base positioned on Israel's doorstep, capable of launching massive attacks the moment Iran decided to escalate. But Hezbollah was only part of the network. In Gaza, Iran developed relationships with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Hamas is an Israel organization whose founding charter explicitly calls for the destruction of Israel. Iran provided Hamas with funding, weapons technology, and rocket manufacturing expertise. The rockets that Hamas fired at Israeli cities for decades were built using Iranian designs and Iranian-supplied components. Islamic Jihad in Gaza was even more directly connected to Iran. While Hamas maintained some organizational independence, Islamic Jihad was essentially a direct instrument of Iranian foreign policy in Gaza. In Syria, Iran maintained deep relationships with the Assad government. Syria became a transit route for Iranian weapons moving to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iranian Revolutionary Corps commanders operated openly in Syria. Iranian-backed militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan fought alongside Syrian government forces during the Syrian civil war. In Iraq, Iran cultivated relationships with Shia militias that became known collectively as the Popular Mobilization Forces. These groups controlled significant territory and political influence in Iraq. And in Yemen, Iran supported the Houthi movement. The Houthis began as a religious and political movement in northern Yemen. With Iranian support, they became a military force capable of firing ballistic missiles and drones at targets hundreds of miles away, including Israel. This entire network, stretching from Yemen in the south to Lebanon in the north, from Gaza in the west to Iraq in the east, Iran called it the axis of resistance. Israel called it a noose being tightened around its neck. By the early 2000s, Iran had effectively created a multi-front threat around Israel, using proxy forces that Iran could direct without taking direct responsibility.